Today our topic is Interpersonal Mastery, and when we covered this topic in the Leadership Academy, it was stressed that interpersonal effectiveness is a key ingredient in leadership development. And we're very fortunate to have Robin with us today. We talked a lot about the theory of interpersonal mastery and how we conduct critical conversations, how we build influence and build a constituency, and we also talked about how to navigate conflict. But today, I think we're going to hear from someone who is hands-on in the community, building personal relationships with all of the nonprofits and community organizations that we work with here at Boulder County, and also is working on the development of a master plan for human services, which is a huge interpersonal job. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Robin Bohannan to the podium.
Thank you, Rick, and thanks everybody for being here. I was told I was the reason the county is not closing today. Just kidding. So, I was actually pretty intimidated by this invitation. It's something to be asked to talk about interpersonal mastery because it implies that I have a lot of it. And it's intimidating to follow Sheriff Pelley, who gave a great talk about self-mastery. So my first thoughts when Susan called were, what? You want me? And it reminded me of that Oscar talk by Sally Fields. They like me, they like me. And then I thought, well, what is interpersonal mastery? And I thought, boy, I'm glad the talk's not for months away because I have time to learn about it. So this is the definition from the Leadership Academy and what many of you attended the Mountain States Council and learned about interpersonal mastery. But here's what we're going to talk about. I'm just going to tell you my story, and I hope that my experience and story will really help you to be brave and learn to know yourself and how to relate to other people in the course of your work. So yeah, Rick wants us to serve and wants us all to be leaders, and it's really a great calling. And again, I want to stress that my reaction is interpersonal mastery, who me? But again, perhaps my journey will might have something to inform you. You might have read my best-selling novel, Essays on Leadership and Interpersonal Mastery, The Accidental Leader. But I really want to thank and dedicate this talk to my grandmother, Elaine. My grandmother ran away from home in Montana when she was 14 because her father didn't believe that girls should be educated. And so she lived with a family and basically was their servant in those times so that she could go to high school. And she taught at Montana's first one-room school classroom. She and I were both born on the Dalai Lama's birthday, and I think that's why we have such great interpersonal mastery. But, George Bush was also born on her birthday. Nancy Reagan, Sylvester Stallone. So this is why I don't really believe in astrology. So I was really fortunate to attend a real boot camp for leadership, and it was called the AIDS crisis. It was a time of much fear, ignorance, death, and really the reality is that if you didn't step up, people would die. I think I got a lot of my leadership training and my interpersonal mastery by default. I think interpersonal mastery is really connected to authentic leadership and really knowing yourself. And for me, what I know about myself is I do my best when I'm clued into my passion. And I think that's true for many people who work for Boulder County. Interpersonal mastery can be learned. It's not just about how you were born and how your parents raised you. I was over 30 when the AIDS crisis hit, and I learned a lot during that time. Again, my experience may be a bit skewed because of the crisis, but I do think it tells a story about how we are called to serve, and that by grace we usually show up and heed our calling. So in the early days of the AIDS crisis, there were no answers. In hindsight, when I think about my experience and try to make sense of it, the framework was, again, about authenticity. And you can call it interpersonal mastery, you can call it authentic leadership, you can call it emotional intelligence. but it's really about showing up, paying attention to yourself and the people around you. What I learned about communication and about relating with people, again, a lot of the work that I did was talking with young people who were going to die and about being honest about their journey into death. I also did a lot of talks with young adults about safe sex behavior. And there was a time where I got actually invited to precede funerals. And again, my thought is, I can't do a funeral, I'm not a minister. But it was about showing up and telling a real story about someone's life. So let's talk about emotional self-awareness. I think sometimes it's hard to really clue into what feelings we have. In the early days of the crisis, we lost our friends weekly. And I worked for my boss who just couldn't stand the emotion. And so he always took us out to lunch, and he bought us flowers, and he just really had a hard time with just letting us be sad. And we, as a staff team, one day I remember marching into Tim's office and saying, you know what, you gotta just let us be sad, because that's the right feeling. And after that, we developed a support group for staff as well as for families. So again, once you know how you feel, and it's hard for us. And I think this picture shows that some of us are really, especially when we're in leadership positions or work in the public sector, we feel like we have to hide or be guarded around our emotions. Once you know how you feel, it's really important to choose how you behave based on that feeling. I'm always telling my kids, it's okay to have your feelings, but choose how you act on them. And I think that's a good advice for all of us. So a lot of it is about being present, really checking in, taking the time, taking a breath, really sensing where you are at any given time. We had a motto during the AIDS crisis that it was okay to be happy and sad. And one day the Daily Camera came to do an article about our agency, and we were yucking it up. We were laughing in the lobby, and the photographer came and he said, you have to be sad for this picture. Don't laugh. And literally, he took a picture and we're all biting our tongues because we don't want to laugh. Because again, he thought if we were in the AIDS crisis, it must just only be about sadness. So another thing about emotional intelligence is really about motivating yourself. Knowing how you feel, knowing how to use your feelings, and then plugging yourself in even when it's the hardest thing to do. So the work during that crisis was always about persistence and never giving up, and using relationships to get through some of the hardest times. So I think the real key in all of this is empathy. And empathy has gotten sort of a bad name these days. This cartoon talks about empathy being just a code word for socialism. So empathy is really about listening to understand, listening in order to improve communication, and really create a problem-solving environment. And in order to do that, we really have to reach out and establish trust and be in relationship with each other. And I think these days, that's more important than ever before. Because you know, when you come right down to it, all we have is us. All I have is myself and how I react to you, and all you have is what you can give back to me. I thought this was interesting. I think this is in Santa Monica. They've actually created what are called empathic listening posts, where people just pull up outside of a cafe, sit down and say, so how's it going? Tell me about it. Without trying to fix it, just to listen. And I think that in the public sector, we often hear the public say, well, you're not listening to me. You're not hearing me. And I know my experience sometimes with that is that people think that in order to be heard, it means that you fix something or you do something that they want you to do. When really the act of true listening and being can be very healing itself. So this is a lot. We have to pull it all together. And as you can see in this picture, empathy is a really big part of that, how we relate and connect with one another. So what we know about emotional intelligence is that it can be learned. Research shows that the competencies are controlled by different parts of our brain, and it's really important to be awake and on top of that. Emotional intelligence has been proven to be twice as important as your IQ in your job performance, and people like to work for leaders and bosses who demonstrate emotional intelligence. There have been surveys shown that that's the one most important thing in terms of a work environment. Leaders with high emotional intelligence have been rated the best bosses. That would be me, of course, right? So the other thing that we talk about with interpersonal mastery is about intention. And I think we, especially in Boulder, that word is used a lot because, again, it's about being focused and thoughtful. It's very zen to show intention. And I think that's really true, but I also want to caution us that intention can also be used as an excuse. So if I'm in a conversation with you and I say something or express something that you hear and feel differently because of your own experience, and I say, well, I didn't intend that. Where's the burden? Is it on the fact that I can excuse myself because I intended something? Or is it on the recipient to say, you know what, because of who I am in this world, that doesn't work for me? I think we've been taught in the Western culture that interpersonal mastery is about the golden rule, right? Do unto others as what is it? You would have them do unto you. So my experience and what I try to practice is the platinum rule. And the platinum rule has been co-opted by business consultants in HR, sort of the latest and greatest thing, probably 10 years ago. But it really means remembering that people want to be treated the way they want to be treated. And how I think they need to be treated, based on my experience, may be totally off. And so again, it requires sort of slowing down and pausing and thinking through our communication and relationship with one another. We all have opportunities to understand what makes us tick. So how many people in here have done the Myers-Briggs? Or what's the other one? On colors? I'm colorblind, so I never did the colors one. So there are many opportunities for us to really understand what makes us tick. And when we do these examinations with our team members, we can also find out how other people tick. I had an experience once with a nonprofit board, and there was a woman board member who just was struggling being on the board. And we really thought we were doing everything right. We were setting up the board meetings right. We had the agenda. We had an opportunity for public input. And she really struggled. And she said, this just isn't working for me. And I said, well, I don't really get it. We're doing everything right. And she said, well, let me give you an example. She said, you bring chocolate brownies to every board meeting. And you think that's really great. And I'm like, yeah, I take care of my board. She said, I'm allergic to chocolate. It doesn't feel welcoming to me. And it would have been great had you even asked what would make a welcoming environment for me as a new board member, to really figure out what makes me tick. And that was, again, a really good learning for me in terms of understanding how others would like to be treated and finding that out. Another example of this happened for me working in the AIDS crisis. And I was working with a young man. He was 22 when he was dying of AIDS, and he probably had about, 2 months to live. And everybody on his care team was really trying to get him to eat healthy food and take the right medicine and decrease his stress and really remove everything that would affect his immune system. And one day I went to visit him, and there was a volunteer sitting with Mark, and Mark was eating a bowl of Captain Crunch. Horrendous. Sugar's like the worst thing for you when your immune health is failing. But the joy on Mark's face in that moment, eating that Captain Crunch, and I really realized that this volunteer really had connected with Mark and understood what did he really need in those last months, as opposed to what the system or his doctors or his family members were really trying to help him. So it's an important thought and something to always remember, especially when we're in a helping position. What does it really mean? So how do we apply all of this? It's really hard. Collaborative leadership is hard. We've all believe that we come to the table with the right idea. And we've been at those meetings or task force where there's always that person saying, nope, nope, no, that won't work. And there's another person saying, yes, here's this, let's do it this way. I really think true collaborative leadership means we come to the table as equal partners. Rick mentioned the Human Services Strategic Plan, and when we began this process, I was very taken aback by our community partners and their vehemence about this not being a Boulder County plan. They wanted it to be a county plan geographically, but they didn't want the big bad county making all the decisions or having all the power. And I was really taken aback because that hadn't been my experience. And working for the county and understanding that people felt that way about the county at times. And so I really had to step back and let other people step forward. And we spent many months sharing leadership and looking at what that meant. And it was very hard and time consuming. So I think most of our communication is noise. You've all seen this cartoon where the guy's talking to the dog and the dog's hearing blah, 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 blah. I hope that's not what you're hearing today. What happens if we just decide to put aside our need to be right? Or to put aside our need to have it be all about me? What would happen if, in the course of dialogue, the power shifted and it was really about you? And my job was to figure out who you were, what you brought to the table, what you bring to the room, and really get to know you. And that means removing our guard to somewhat. But it also means really knowing ourselves. That motto, to thine own self be true. Again, I think interpersonal mastery is not easy, and it requires a simple decision to show up to yourself and to other people. And my experience is that once you flip that switch and make that decision, it can happen. But you really need to know yourself. So people don't know that I'm a really severe INFP on Myers-Briggs. I hate talking to people. It makes me cower. After every conversation, I have to go in my office and close the door and get my energy back up again. You would never know that. I fight against this every day because I know how important it is. But it's really torture. But the result is that when we do it, the impossible becomes possible. You know, again, I think about the time of the AIDS crisis, and one of the great things was that there was nothing. And so you could imagine the impossible. You could say, we can do anything because there's nothing there and no one was stepping up. You know, we had audacious goals. We expected doctors to treat their patients. We expected the hospital to serve lunch in people's rooms and not leave the tray in the hallway. That happened in our community. We expected that the school district wouldn't disclose the HIV status of kids in the school to everybody just because they were afraid. And we expected daycare providers to care for little kids who had AIDS. That was audacious in those times, and yet it's all come true. So I think what this all says is that we are expected as leaders and asked to push to our limits and really know where on the cliff are we willing to walk out to. Where's the edge? What's your edge? It means challenging the naysayers and actually inviting them to the table and finding out where are they coming from? Why are they saying no? Why don't they think it can be done? I do think most of the stuff we think we can't do, we are already doing. But if we open our eyes, pay attention, and be awake about it, it can be really true. My cliff, the edge that I sort of jumped off, was when I ran for city council. Worst possible thing I could have done for myself. Because it just didn't fit. It was not my calling. You know, people expect your elected officials to talk out loud and really explain where they come from. as an introvert, that's really hard for me. And lots of times when I finally figured out what I wanted to say, the meeting would be over, even at 2 in the morning. My children struggled also with why I was doing this. My daughter said, "I don't think I want to be on city council when I grow up. It's way too much work." So I had to change their reading habits and books that they read to help them understand why we were doing this work. It also meant that regardless of what was happening, I really had to keep my eye on the prize, and in terms of why I personally was there and what I thought I could accomplish while being on council. So if you master interpersonal mastery, will it mean that everybody will like you? No, it won't. And I also think that this cartoon is fun because part of interpersonal mastery is about disagreeing in an interpersonal way. So rather than the cusses and threats, there are ways that we can come to the table with clear and concise considerations about why we don't agree. As I mentioned with the strategic plan, not many partners were on our side. People agreed with the vision. Everybody loved the vision. We tried to do this 20 years ago and it didn't happen. And even 20 years later, people said, that will never work. You can't do it. And even now that the plan is adopted, we're still in a lot of disagreement about how we should implement it. And it requires ongoing conversations and shifts and changes and new communications. But during the process, the relationships have tightened and people are more in connection. And actually that's where more conflict happens because there's a trust level. And you can go deeper and actually discuss more important issues that really help you dive down and get to what you're trying to accomplish. It's no longer at the surface level. So again, just remember, do all this hard work. Doesn't mean everyone's going to like you or agree with you. But I really think our approach to interpersonal mastery and relationships should be the same as our approach and goal around integrated services. It's about being open. It's about any interaction is the right interaction when we engage with one another and try to accomplish something. I again think relationship is the most important factor in accomplishing our goals. This is a little bit hard to read, but it talks about if I had someone to help me when I started, I might have made CEO. Well, actually I did make CEO, but you know what I mean. It's better when we do it in a relationship. I think interpersonal mastery means it's okay to fail. It's okay to be called the fool. And what's the worst thing that could happen? People laugh at you. You're probably not going to get thanked for your efforts. People will always have an opinion and more complaints about the work that you're doing. But even within that, we can celebrate our successes and celebrate each other's successes. When you leave Boulder City Council, you get a little plaque with a quote from Emerson, and it says, have the belief that the reward of a thing well done is having done it. And I think that's really a strong statement, although it would be nice to be acknowledged at the pearly gates, huh? So that's my journey. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have or thoughts or comments. And don't forget to applaud.